begin with a country that's on the edge, and the online disinformation that helped put it there. Separating fact from fiction in Syria can be a challenge. The case against a Palestinian activist Donald Trump once deported from the U.S.
If you told us that's what you intended to do when you came to America, we would have never let you in.
And the disturbing legal precedent that could set. Plus, cold as ice. The enforcement agency scouring America for undocumented immigrants.
Almost 4 a.m. and we are now rolling.
Creating content that's made for TV. Just months after the fall of Bashar al-Assad, Syria has been rocked by an eruption of violence. Coastal towns recently turned into killing fields, with Assad loyalists fighting government forces and armed groups, resulting in some horrifying massacres. The Syrian online space is littered with mis- and disinformation, distorting the facts about this factional violence in some dangerous ways. Different domestic and international actors, all with stakes in the game, are putting out false reports, twisting narratives, hoping to destabilize the transitional government. It is an information war that is inciting sectarian fear, deepening divisions in a country still raw from years of civil war and decades under a brutal dictatorship. And with a distinct lack of strong, independent journalism, rumors are filling the void. And Syrians are struggling to figure out what's really going on and what reporting they can believe. Some news stories have a certain inevitability to them, and Syrians feared that this one, about the factional bloodletting on the Mediterranean coast, was coming. Dateline March 5th, in and around the cities of Banyas, Latakia, and Jabla. 3 months after the fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime in Damascus, and coming out of 14 years of civil war, there is no shortage of weapons in Syria, or forces vying for power, including what remains of a regime that has been defeated, toppled, but not disarmed.
One thing I noticed in the Western coverage is the lack of context, completely omitting how they started. It's started by armed pro-Assad thugs trying to attack the security forces and actually killing many. And then chaos started to happen.
After that, the organized armed groups whose relation to the government is not very clear went to Banyas, to Jable, and other villages around it. They attacked civilians in their homes. In some villages, they took all the men, took them outside of the village and killed them. It was a weekend from hell.
The fighting that broke out on March 5th was set off by armed remnants of the Assad regime, who attacked Syrian security forces and checkpoints along the coast. After those Assad loyalists killed government forces and civilians, Syria's authorities called for reinforcements. Thousands of fighters, including civilians, poured into the area. The result? Mass sectarian killings. At least 800 lives lost, according to the Syrian Network for Human Rights. Most of the victims were Alawites, a Muslim minority group.
نؤكد أننا سنحاسب بكل حزم ودون تهاون كل من تورط في دماء المدنيين أو أساء إلى أهلنا.
Ahmad al-Shara is Syria's interim president. He's a former member of al-Qaeda who went on to lead the rebel group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS. If the killings were a case of revenge, he acknowledged, they went too far. Al-Shara has promised to punish anyone found responsible. Complicating this story is a chaotic media landscape, which, like the government in Damascus, is in a state of transition. Many independent outlets and journalists lack the means, the resources necessary to cover the conflict on the coast, creating an over-reliance on social media, where disinformation thrives. The end result? A state of confusion.
The media scene in Syria was very polarized and divided before the collapse of the regime. Now everything is changing. What used to be the pro-regime media outlets are now being taken over with the new government, but they still don't have clear character yet. They're not trusted enough yet. They do need time. So when we want to know what's happening in Syria, we're still at loss. We still don't know where to look.
The Western media constantly promotes the narrative that the new government is a group of jihadis, just another form of al-Qaeda. This violence was a golden opportunity for them to tell their audience, look, these are the people we warned you about.
The interim president used to be the leader of al-Qaeda in Syria. So there was a lot of questions about whether he was going to be the reformist he claims to be, or whether he was going to go down the route of essentially being a jihadist. And I think
we all know that the Western media often portray Middle Eastern societies, not just the leaders, as radical Islamists or jihadis. So in this story, the accused are jihadis, the victims are helpless, and some outlets even exaggerated the number of Christian victims.
Everyone thinks that they have the full truth, which I don't think any of us does. And it's mainly based on ideological beliefs rather than facts. And the most dangerous thing is that they're actually oppressing the other information that is saying something else. During the last 14 years, there were many dis- and misinformation campaigns across Syria, but I haven't witnessed such a massive one as the one that happened in the last weekend.
If nature abhors a vacuum, disinformation adores one. And Syria's fractured media space has left it ripe for the picking. Fake news has been weaponized to stoke sectarian fear, fuel violence, and undermine efforts for societal coexistence. Examples include, from one side, the continuing portrayal of Bashar al-Assad as the guardian of Syria's minorities. From the other, the stereotyping of all Alawites as pro-Assad loyalists when they are clearly not. The outside actors involved include Iran, Russia, and Israel, states with differing tactics but similar agendas, all willing to destabilize Syria and spread chaos in order to further their interests there.
There are groups that play a negative role by promoting misinformation. The pro-Iran axis, which extends from Iran to Iraq, has many accounts and pages that spread false news through pictures, news, and video that are either out of context or completely fabricated. For years now, the Russian axis has also distorted the truth regarding massacres committed under Bashar al-Assad's rule.
The atmosphere online has been very vulnerable to this misinformation, disinformation, intimidation, and threats. And it is expected for it to take a sectarian tone to it, because throughout the last 14 years, the Syrian regime has worked really hard to separate and divide Syria based on people's sect and religious belief.
For me, what's more critical is casting doubts about our ability to live together. It's about spreading fear and literally oppressing any stories about coexistence. It is very sad to see the Syrians who have been losing their credibility because of the campaigns of disinformation during these 14 years. And now you see some of those exact victims trying to deny the atrocities that are happening to others just because they're from a different sect.
If false information and incitement to violence continue to spread, and if the Syrian state doesn't tackle those spreading it, something much worse could happen.
Something like an existential threat to the new Syrian government, which is still in its precarious transitional stages, with a new leader who is trying to distance himself from his al-Qaeda roots. This past Friday, Ahmad al-Shara signed a new interim constitution, which, when it comes to presidential powers, is light on specifics, checks and balances, inclusivity for some of Syria's minorities. The coverage of that development has been dwarfed, however, by what just happened on the coast. For a population fresh out of a civil war, the worst-case scenario does not seem that far off, that their new government will find itself presiding over the same complicated set of sectarian conflicts the Assad regime did. In a country where journalism has taken a backseat to authoritarianism, misinformation, and disinformation for far too long.
Since the beginning of the Hafiz Assad era, there was no free speech, a very fundamental right that Syrians were deprived from for 50 years. And when the revolution started in 2011, that caused the creation of alternative media. But we did not see a lot of changes. We just changed who we are talking about. This is something Assad regime has installed in the country, and we need to know how to get rid of it.
To put an end to this misinformation in Syria, we need more transparency from the government. We need the media to be given access even to difficult areas. It's not convincing to say we don't want them to go because it's high risk. The more the government give journalists the freedom to move around the country and to report freely, the more it protects them, the more we will be able to stand in the way of this misinformation.
True to his words and an executive order he signed back in January, Donald Trump has taken, quote, forceful and unprecedented steps to combat the explosion of anti-Semitism on American campuses. This past week, the White House showed just how far it was willing to go to enforce that order, and Meenakshi Ravi has been on this story.
The White House set off a firestorm this past week when immigration agents arrested Mahmoud Khalil, a recent graduate from Columbia University who has played a key role leading Palestine solidarity protests on campus there. Khalil's case is an alarming example of the state targeting pro-Palestine activism, and it's a serious challenge to the USA's vaunted First Amendment protections of free speech. Khalil is a permanent resident in the United States. He holds a green card, is married to an American citizen, and now faces possible deportation.
I think we ought to get them all out of the country. They're troublemakers, they're agitators, they don't love our country. We ought to get them the hell out.
The messaging from Washington has been chilling. 2 days after the arrest, the White House tweeted this. Using the Hebrew greeting shalom as a taunt, the government accused Khalil baselessly of being pro-Hamas, an anti-Semite, and a terrorist. The character assassination has also surfaced in mainstream media.
He's paid by a terrorist organization that beheads babies.
Here's the bottom line. Mr. Khalil hates America.
Khalil has not been charged with criminal activity. Instead, the government is using a rarely invoked provision of US law, which says that non-citizens can be deported if there are, quote, reasonable grounds to believe that that person would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States. And that judgment can be made by the Secretary of State.
Because these lunatics are running around with covers on their face, screaming terrifying things. If you told us that's what you intended to do when you came to America, we would have never let you in.
Since Khalil's arrest, there have been numerous protests demanding his release. Pushback from the opposition, Democrats, has been slow and underwhelming. A cohort of left-wing and anti-war Democrats signed a letter in support of Khalil, and one lone senator put out a statement on video.
If our new reality is that a president can disappear an opposition protester with no charges filed against them, we are not America any longer.
Murphy added, today it's Mahmoud Khalil. Tomorrow it could be me or you, meaning anyone.
Thanks, Meena. Staying in the U.S. and the agency responsible for arresting Mahmoud Khalil, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. For many Americans, especially those from immigrant communities, ICE has a troublesome reputation. Long before Trump returned to office, ICE's critics said it was out of control, accusing it of jailing more immigrants than the law allowed it to, locking them up in conditions that are dirty and dangerous. ICE has countered that with a publicity blitz. Federal agents have reportedly been told to be camera-ready during their immigration raids, and journalists have been allowed to join those raids, making a television spectacle of the arrests of often vulnerable people. The authorities are unapologetic about turning immigration enforcement into media content, calling it an accountability measure that the U.S. electorate voted for. The Listening Post's Tariq Nafa now on the televised choreography that has become part of immigration enforcement in Donald Trump's America.
With a president in the White House who most Americans came to know through a reality TV show, it is somehow fitting that one of the issues that Donald Trump obsesses over, undocumented immigrants, has been packaged into reality-style TV.
Almost 4 a.m. and we are now rolling.
I think it's really important for Trump's governing style to have these things sort of televised. For him, if these things don't happen on TV, are they actually happening?
This morning, federal agents are intensifying the Trump administration's promise of mass deportations of undocumented immigrants.
The border represents a geographic site where the aspirations, the delusions, the anxieties, and the mythical expressions of the United States are enacted.
As war with terror organizations are happening all over the world, and they have operatives on our borders that are ramping up unlike ever before.
Much of what presidential administrations have done for years is enact a sort of border theater, which is rooted in violence. It is through those images, it is through the confrontations, manufactured in some instances, that the United States defines its sense of citizenship for the people.
Now, the president is dramatically expanding the powers of federal agencies to help with mass deportations.
He knows the power of this thing right here, the camera. When you take the camera, that's a big weapon nowadays, whether it's citizen journalism, whether it's a well-known company, or if it's the U.S. government trying to go out there showing the raids that this is what we're doing, this is what we're working on behind closed doors. I love the fact that they're doing it, to be honest with you. I love the fact that we're able to see it.
That kind of enthusiasm for seeing people hounded and humiliated on TV appears to be the point.
This is the police. You have a warrant. Come out with your hands up.
The televised raids are a show of force, choreographed to intimidate undocumented immigrants. And while those tactics form part of Donald Trump's long-promised mass deportation plan, they're not new. The Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, or ICE, has been turning its operations into TV content since the early 2000s and the so-called War on Terror. Journalists are often invited to tag along with officers enforcing the policy in what are known as ride-alongs.
I did that 20 years ago. After 9/11, during the Bush administration, reporters would join federal agents while they conducted raids. That was part of a concerted visual propaganda machine that the Bush administration mounted to shape public opinion. It shored up support for the quote-unquote war on terror that resulted in the deaths of millions of people, and it shored up support for massive border buildup, border wall construction, and the deployment of troops.
Fast forward a decade to Donald Trump's first term in office, and immigration enforcement had become a PR disaster for the White House. The images and sounds of crying children separated from their parents earned the administration reams of bad press. Trump officials learned a lesson that sometimes hardline policies require softer packaging. So this time round, the administration has used some popular media personalities, like daytime TV host Dr. Phil.
We're here to tell your story and have your back. So we're getting the word out that you're out there taking down the bad guys.
Dr. Phil is one of a slew of media figures and journalists who've been granted first-hand access to ICE's made-for-TV immigration raids.
These so-called journalists riding around with the police on a ride-along, it's like take your kid to work day.
For 2 days, News Nation was given the unique privilege of riding along with this trained team of officers.
One can only sort of have one perception after this. Black and brown people are running around, and these are the good guys, mostly white guys, going around and arresting them and putting them in prisons. And so it is not journalism.
It's important to remember when we're looking at reports in which journalists are on ride-alongs.
We're now heading to the northwest part of the city.
The viewers are seeing, whether it be the border, whether it be any neighborhood, through the eyes of federal agents. And therefore, Journalists become the amplifiers of their perspective. So when journalists, quote unquote, embed, we are telling the story from a particular point of view.
In the United States, not having the right documents isn't actually a criminal offense, it's a civil one. But you'd never know that from the language used by politicians and journalists.
If you're here illegally, get ready to leave.
The goal should be to deport every illegal in this country that we can find.
If you're here illegally, we're going to hunt you down and we're going to deport your ass.
As successive administrations have hardened their approach to immigration, the packaging of that news for public consumption has become more and more sensationalistic.
You got criminal aliens that are on the street that have weapons, that have grenades, that have all type of things.
In Trump Term 2, the government provides news outlets with not just the drama of the raids, but a new TV-friendly protagonist, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, who joins in on the action, complete with branded body armor.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem came along for the raid.
How many of these do you expect you'll witness as secretary?
I hope a lot.
One of the most important things the Trump administration is doing is the fact that they're televising their raids. And the reason why this is very important is because that's what their voters wanted. They were concerned about the 10 to 15 million illegal immigrants that came across the border. And so their job is to say, hey, we're doing our job. It's televised. Here's the camera. This is what we got going on.
You want cameras at these events, don't you? And some would say you want this spectacle to be filmed.
It's not a spectacle. This is our nation's law enforcement judicial process.
It's such a great publicity stunt to scare the crap out of the people that are here illegally, specifically the ones that are criminals.
Televised events, raids, are so important to defining an enemy. Someone who cannot speak for themselves, someone for whom we have little to no information, imagery that is meant to communicate to people where their place is, and in some instances that they have no rights, and ultimately nothing can be done to help you.
Social media is where ICE showcases the numerous quote-unquote criminals they've apprehended. In most cases, the agency makes no distinction between those suspected of a crime and those who've actually been found guilty of criminal activity. However, data released by ICE paints a different picture. It shows that the surge in arrests of undocumented immigrants largely targets people without criminal convictions or criminal charges. And yet, the show goes on. In February, the White House tweeted a video. Scenes from the deportation of immigrants. It was ugly and gratuitous. But for Trump supporters, it serves as evidence that they're getting exactly what they voted for.
I don't mind imposing some fear in criminals that came here illegally and are hurting citizens. Our job is to make sure people who live here legally are safe. So if we can make an example of them and show clips like that, I'm not surprised that they're doing that. I actually like it. And if it makes some people uncomfortable, I like it even more. Americans voted on November 5th, 2024, and they wanted America to be safer, and that's exactly what this administration is doing.
And finally, back to the Mahmoud Khalil case. Many of the details that have emerged since Khalil's arrest have come from two subscriber-funded news outlets, Zateo and Dropsite. Both are staffed by reporters who have worked in the U.S. mainstream media but left to do the kind of journalism that doesn't happen on the corporate side. It was Zateo that confirmed Khalil was handpicked for deportation by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. And Dropsite poured through Khalil's social media to debunk allegations from pro-Trump voices that he had called for the, quote, eradication of Western civilization. Dropsite has also launched an online petition calling for Khalil's release, saying this case sets a dangerous precedent that could criminalize dissent. This is a story that we will keep our eyes on and would recommend that anyone wanting to do the same should give Zateo and Dropsite a follow.